Differences between economic growth and economic development. Economic growth versus economic development. Economic growth refers to the increment in amount of goods and services produced by an economy. Whereas, economic development refers to the reduction and elimination of poverty, unemployment and inequality with the context of growing economy. Economic growth means an increase in real national income and national output. Whereas, economic development means an improvement in the quality of life and living standards, for example measures of literacy, life expectancy, and health care. Objective of economic growth is to lead higher living standards and more employment opportunities. Whereas, objective of economic development has been non-inflationary self-reliant growth with social justice. Economic growth is the positive change in the indicators of economy. Whereas, economic development is the quantitative and qualitative change in an economy. Economic growth focuses on production of goods and services. Whereas, economic development focuses on distribution of resources. Indicators of economic growth are gross domestic product, GDP, gross national income, GNI, and per capita income. Whereas, indicators of economic development are Human Development Index, HDI, Human Poverty Index, HPI, Gini Coefficient, Gender Development Index, GDI, Balance of Trade and Physical Quality of Life Index, PQLI. Economic growth is single-dimensional in nature as it only focuses on income of the people. Whereas, economic development is multidimensional in nature as it focuses on both income and improvement of living standards of the people. Economic growth is the precursor and prerequisite for economic development, and economic growth is the subset of economic development. Whereas, economic development comes after economic growth and economic development is not subset of economic growth. Economic growth relates a gradual increase in one of the components of GDP, consumption, government spending, investment or net exports. Whereas, economic development relates to growth of human capital indexes and decrease in inequality and is concerned with how people are affected. Economic growth is the increase of production. Whereas, economic development is the increase in productivity. Economic growth is the means of development. Whereas, economic development is the ends of development. Poverty and inequality may remain in economic growth. Whereas, achieving economic development is linked with end of poverty and inequality. Economic growth is a material, physical and narrow concept. Whereas, economic development is more abstract and broader concept. Economic growth is more relevant metric for measuring progress in developed countries. Whereas, economic development is more relevant for measuring progress and quality of life in developing countries. Economic growth is for short term or short period. It is measured in certain time period. Whereas, economic development is a continuous and long-term process. Economic development does not have specific time period to measure. Economic growth is an automatic process that may or may not require intervention from the government. Whereas, economic development requires intervention from the government as all the developmental policies are formed by the government. In short, economic growth refers to an increase over time in a country's real output of goods and services, GNP, or real output per capita income. Economic growth is concerned with increase in economy's output but are not linked with happiness of public life. Whereas, economic development includes process and policies by which a country improves the social, economic and political well-being of its people and also concerned with structural changes in the economy and are linked with happiness of public life. Kindly subscribe my YouTube channel Thesis Helper. Thanks for watching.